Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson, and happy Halloween, listeners. If you're listening to this the day it goes up, it is October 30th. That means tomorrow is the big day. Hope you have your decorations up, your costumes picked out, your candy in a big bowl waiting for all the trick-or-treaters. My son is going to be Cookie Monster. It's going to be the cutest thing you've ever seen. And since it's Halloween, we've got a little bit of a special episode for you this week. The great BJ Colangelo is going to join the show to talk about not just the book series Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, but sort of the art of telling scary stories and how those books taught a young BJ Colangelo how to be a horror storyteller and a horror fan. It's a great conversation. We also talk about a cause that is near and dear to my heart, which is how to expose your children to horror in a safe and fun way. That's something I'm going to be spending a lot of time with over the next few years of my life. So that's a great chat we have coming up for you in just a few minutes. Hope you enjoy it. Before we get there, though, I did want to recommend a couple of things. On the book side, I just published a piece over at Paste Magazine in which I collected the 20 scariest Stephen King short stories ever, or at least my picks for the 20 scariest Stephen King short stories ever. And there are a lot of usual suspects in there. If you're familiar with Stephen King short fiction, and I'm guessing a lot of you are, there's, stuff like Graveyard Shift, The Mangler, The Jaunt. Of course, you got to have The Jaunt. But I did want to talk about one particular story that I, for whatever reason, just hadn't ever thought of as that scary or even that memorable until I revisited it. And it's called Crouch End. It's in the Nightmares and Dreamscapes collection. And what got me to revisit it was Eric Vespi and the late great Scott Wampler over on the King Cast. Shout out to the King Cast. Talk about that story a lot. It's been covered on that show. It was Wampler, one of Wampler's favorites. And after a while of hearing them talk about it, I just was like, damn, I need to go read Crouch End again. And guys, it rips. It absolutely rips. It's a wonderful Lovecraftian exploration of this one little neighborhood in London from which it gets its name. And there are these two police inspectors who are trying to deal with a missing persons case that may or may not be supernatural, and the woman reporting the case is an American tourist who may or may not be going through some sort of episode. And the way it unfolds is so cozy and calm and careful, and it just sort of slowly unrolls out in this really pleasant way. And it's weird to use the word pleasant, but it really does feel like cozy and fun, even as things get eldritch and absolutely terrifying. So, yeah, if you haven't read Crouch End in a while, or if you haven't ever read Crouch End, go pick up the Nightmares and Dreamscapes collection and give it a look. And read the rest of the stories in there too. Nightmares and Dreamscapes, I feel like, is a collection that gets lost in the shadow of like Night Shift and Skeleton Crew, which are probably the two best known King collections, but it's got bangers. It's got bangers. It's got another of the best and creepiest King stories, The Moving Finger, which is just such a simple and strange premise played out to absolute wonderful madness by the master. So yeah, Crouch End, Nightmares and Dreamscapes. Go check it out. On the movie side, I'm recording this on Tuesday, the 29th, and earlier today we found out we lost the great Teri Garr, the actress who is best known, if you're a horror fan, for being Inga in Mel Brooks's Young Frankenstein. And it occurred to me as I took in that news, first of all, condolences to Teri Garr's family and friends, but it occurred to me that she was the last main cast member of Young Frankenstein to leave us. So, Peter Boyle left us, Gene Wilder, Marty Feldman, Madeline Kahn, and now Teri Garr, Cloris Leachman, of course, and now Teri Garr. And y'all, Young Frankenstein is my favorite comedy, and One of my favorite movies, like if you asked me to jot down my 10 favorite movies, Young Frankenstein would be on that list every time. I have watched it at least once a year since I was 16 years old, and often many, many more times because it just makes me so happy. And Teri Garr, I think, in that film and in her performance, gets sort of nudged aside in the eyes of the viewer sometimes because she's in there with giants, right? Like Gene Wilder, comedy giant, Madeline Kahn, comedy giant, Marty Feldman, one of the funniest human beings who has ever lived, and of course Peter Boyle and all that makeup, and Cloris Leachman, legend, right? And then there's Teri Garr, and you think like, oh, she's the supporting character, she's the lab assistant that Dr. Frankenstein falls in love with, and she kind of fills her role nicely. But no, if you really watch that movie, there is a tenderness in the way that she carries out that character. And even when she's playing things for laughs, there is this sense of vulnerability and heart and warmth that I think so many parody movies are missing. So many parody movies, they just want to get straight to making fun of the thing and making as many references as they can, and they sort of miss that heart, that tenderness. And Teri Garr carries it throughout all of Young Frankenstein. And as soon as I get done recording this, I'm going to go watch it because I was going to watch it anyway, let's be honest. But now that Teri Garr is gone, it feels like a fitting tribute to sit down and pop on Young Frankenstein. So, hey, got a couple of days left in October. And even if you don't watch it in October, anytime is a good time for Young Frankenstein. So check that out. But that's enough of me rambling. Hope you all have a great Halloween. And to help you get into the Halloween spirit even more, let's head over to our interview with the one, the only BJ Colangelo. Joining us for our 2024 Halloween special is someone so multi-hyphenated they make Barbra Streisand look like an underachiever. Writer, director, producer, actor, baton-twirling champion, singer, podcaster, film critic, journalist, the internet's foremost lover of the great Paul Williams. BJ Colangelo is here. BJ, thanks for being on the show.
Can I have you record that and send that to my mom the next time she's like, "What is it that you do again?" That's not how my mom talks. That's just the voice I give her.
It's here. It's on the recording. So you can just send her this episode and she'll know.
Absolutely.
So you are the co-host and co-creator with your wonderful wife Harmony of one of my favorite pop culture podcasts, This Ends at Prom, and y'all always do really fun stuff for October, and this episode will drop on October 30th, but in case people missed what you did for Halloween this year, can you just give the people a preview of what This Ends at Prom is like in October 2024?
Oh, absolutely. So, This Ends at Prom is a coming of age podcast where we talk about media that is either about or marketed towards teen girl audiences. And the definition of teen is pretty flexible. We also go all the way up to people having quarter life crises. But October, which is what we consider our spooky season episodes, are my favorites of the year because it's when I finally get to really just focus on horror for a month, because the overwhelming majority of horror movies are also teen girl stories. Like the entire slasher genre might as well just double as, teen girl movies after dark, so to speak. And so this is our fourth year, or actually it's our fifth year doing an October because we started right before October. Um, and this month we opened with the 40th anniversary of A Nightmare on Elm Street, and we were joined by the hosts of Horror Movie Survival Guide, Terry Gamble and Julia Marquesi. So that was a very, very exciting talk. We also talked about the 10-year anniversary of The Guest, a movie that I love dearly. My favorite.
Hell yes.
Favorite freaky little weirdo performance from Dan Stevens. Also, a movie that I was doxxed for supporting. So, if you want that story, you'll have to listen to that episode. We also always try to cover at least one movie that's a little bit more family friendly because we do have some scaredy cat listeners and I don't want to completely leave them out. So our like more family friendly option this year is Henry Selick's Wendell and Wild, which is a stop motion horror movie that he made with Jordan Peele and Keegan Michael Key that went to Netflix and therefore a lot of people didn't see it, which is a huge bummer because the movie rules.
Hmm.
We also had a newer movie called Departing Seniors from 2023, and we were joined by the director of that movie, Claire Cooney. It's a very fun slasher that's, very, very meta with a lot of the teen horror movies that came before it. And then on Halloween, so a day after this episode goes live, we are talking about Lucky McKee's May, one of my
Ah.
all-time favorites, a movie that people always forget is actually a Halloween movie. And so it just felt really fitting to, finally talk about May and what happens when you can't find a friend, so you have to make one. And that is October on This Ends at Prom.
Yeah. Oh man, I still haven't seen Departing Seniors, so I have to go watch that before I listen to that episode. But yeah, that's an amazing lineup. The Guest in particular, I love The Guest, man.
It's so fucking good.
It's
Sorry for
so
swearing,
fucking
but
good.
like
No, no,
it's
no,
so
swear,
good.
swear.
Okay, good.
It's so fucking good. Like I'm still bummed that they had a 10th anniversary screening at Fantastic Fest and I couldn't go. There were two big, like they had Jennifer Kent was there doing like a live commentary for the Babadook,
Hmm.
and then they had something going on with The Guest, and I was really bummed that I couldn't do either of them. But the Guest, if you have not seen The Guest and you still don't know what's happening in The Guest, just don't read anything. Just turn it on, let it
Hmm.
happen to you. You will thank us later. Um, so another big project that you and Harmony recently got up to is you wrote a book length critical examination of Sleepaway Camp. Speaking of
Hmm.
teen slasher stories for Die 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 Books, and it's such a rich vein, that movie, in so many different ways. I'm just curious, like as a team collaborating on something like that, like what did the beginning of that process look like for the two of you? Were you just sitting around as a couple talking about Sleepaway Camp? How did what was your way into writing a book length piece on that?
So Harmony and I have both loved Sleepaway Camp for many, many years. And I think that there's a lot of power when you are with somebody who has a similar sense of understanding of difficult movies, as many people would classify them as. And Sleepaway Camp is a difficult movie. Um, and so we talk about the movie a lot, and we would rewatch it, probably once a season. And these very rich conversations would come out of it because, for those listening who don't know, I am a lesbian, but I'm a cis woman, and my wife Harmony is a trans woman. So obviously, her take on Sleepaway Camp is going to have an additional layer to it that, most cis people watching the movie, like, even if you are an ally and you understand and you're like pro trans rights, like, if you're not experiencing that life, then there are little things that you're probably not going to pick up on that she picks up on immediately. And so she ended up writing this piece that was called The Transgender Defense of Angela Baker, or The Transgender Defense of Sleepaway Camp. And it did some numbers, like it did some pretty big numbers. And I think last I checked, if you Google like Sleepaway Camp trans, that's the first thing that comes up. And
Mm-hmm.
so the publishers actually reached out to us because I had also written, I think for like Dread Central, but I wrote something about Sleepaway Camp. And they asked us, would you be interested in writing like a feature length book about Sleepaway Camp and its history? And we of course jumped at the opportunity, but then we had to actually figure out, well, what does that look like? Because this is a difficult film. So what we wanted to do is figure out all of the different angles that people analyze this movie, because we've been in the discourse minds for years. So we've heard all of the arguments. And so we took all of the main arguments that we hear from people And then we started looking into the history of how the movie was made, how, critics received the movie at the time, how critics have since viewed the movie. We watched so many video essays from like queer critics and trans critics just to see how this movie has fluctuated. Got to know, this guy named Jeff Hayes, who was in charge of the Sleepaway Camp websites. He's also written a book on Sleepaway Camp. His is kind of like a history of it, but he ran the websites, which then was how a lot of people who were fans of the movie got together. So, just looking at that timeline, and as we were doing that research, we started recognizing that there was almost a direct parallel, or there's a direct correlation between what was going on with queer liberation and queer rights, in terms of the fight for civil equality, and how people felt about the movie. Whenever queer rights are threatened, people tend to be more protective of that movie. Whenever people feel a little comfortable, like when Obama was in office, people got a lot more critical of the text. And so that was very, very interesting to us. So then I started following those sorts of rabbit holes. And then we knew that we wanted to have at least 2 chapters where I didn't really have anything to do with it. I edited those chapters before we sent them off to the publisher because I love Harmony deeply, but she has no problem being like, and fuck this person specifically by name. And I'm like, you cannot put that in a book. Oh my God. But I handled a lot of like the history, a lot of the research, a lot of the more brainy sides of things. And then Harmony, caps it with looking at this movie in terms of it being a trans text, in terms of people tokenizing trans people in a way to like make them feel like they're allowed to like the movie instead of just making decisions for themselves. And then after that was all sort of written, then we went back through it and made sure that it sounded like a book that came from both of our voices, because I sometimes can fall down these rabbit holes where everything gets really clinical and really academic, and I'm like, that's not a fun thing to read. So we would go back and it's like, okay, how can I say this where I'm still getting the I did my research voice across, but also people know that I'm not trying to act like this movie where someone definitely is wearing a like Party City fake mustache is like the peak of cinema. Like, we're still here to have a fun, stupid time.
Yeah. Uh, so yeah, everybody, if you haven't seen Sleepaway Camp, first of all, watch that. Make that one of your tough watches this October, because I love the idea that there is like it's almost like a Waffle House index for a certain cultural subset. The idea that based on where we are as a culture, Sleepaway Camp gets more or less controversial.
It's super
That's
weird.
amazing.
It's super weird, but it makes complete sense to me because
Yeah.
when you are feeling more comfortable culturally, when you don't have to worry about, am I going to get fired because I'm gay? You can take the time to be like, you know what? This movie's a little fucked up if you really think about it. But when you're being attacked, it's like, I don't want anyone to look at that movie ever. This is my movie. It is not your responsibility to criticize that movie. Like, I think the best relationship that I wish more people had with their media is you should treat your problematic faves like your little brother, where it's like you can pick on them, but no one else should be able to pick on them. Like, that should be how people feel about those movies. Just love the movie for what it is, understand that the movie is imperfect, learn to love things critically, and just just don't get so upset and so like worked up because, oh my god, is there a moral failing because I like this piece of shit slasher movie from 1983? No, you're
Oh,
fine.
this is funny because I literally, like, I think it was yesterday, saw on your Twitter something similar about the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Like, of course Rocky
I'm
Horror's problematic, man. It was the 70s. Come on.
And like the thing too is like it was like at the time, was it? No. We've just evolved beyond where our language has changed. The
Hmm.
sentiment is still the same.
Yeah.
It just it makes me so wild. I talk about this a lot with friends. Like, I would much rather deal with somebody whose language is imperfect but their heart is in the right place than somebody who has learned all of the correct things to say but is a hateful person. Like,
Yeah.
there's something more insulting to me for like hearing somebody be like, "Oh, you're a homosexual? Well, bless your heart," versus somebody that's like,
Mm-hmm.
"What do I care what two dykes do in their personal life?" And it's like, "Yeah, I like that guy. Like that
Yeah.
guy's he's on the up and up here."
Yes, we all like that guy. Anyway, so everyone should go get the Sleepaway Camp book. Also, if you want like a taste of what you can get from that, we're here talking to BJ, and BJ is wonderful. Harmony is an amazing cultural critic. Harmony writes wonderful stuff. So like go find that piece Harmony wrote about Sleepaway Camp. I remember when it came out and was just blown away by it. So yeah, go find that. Go check out the book. But today we are here to talk about Halloween, the spookiest of holidays. I don't even know what I was doing just then. I'm sorry.
It's the
Uh,
spookiest
the
holiday.
spookiest holiday. Boils and ghouls. So I wanted to start just by talking about Halloween in general because I love uh childhood stories about what Halloween was like
Hmm.
for us. And you and I are similar in age. We both kind of had Halloween in the 90s, right?
Hmm.
Um so I'm curious what your Halloween experience was, because mine was very, I've talked about this a little bit on the show before, but I was not allowed around horror as a kid. My dad had this very, which is very funny considering what I do for a living now, but my dad had this very it came from a very good place. He wanted to protect his children, and the way he saw it, protecting his children meant they don't need to be scared of things. We don't need scary things in their life. So anything I can do to take scary out of their lives is good. So Halloween for us was you dress up in costumes and you go trick or treating, and that's it. We didn't decorate for Halloween. I didn't carve a jack-o'-lantern until I was like 22. We didn't, and the other rule was we could not be anything scary in our costumes. We had to be something nice, which when you think about it is fine. There are a lot of
Yeah,
quote
there's
unquote
plenty of
nice.
options. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised I never went as a Ninja Turtle. That should have been like my first pick. But I have a story about my favorite like costume decision from my childhood based on that rule. But first I want to hear from you, like what was Halloween like in the Colangelo household growing up?
Okay, so this is when I get to be the most nostalgic about my family. I am very, very lucky that I have incredibly loving, supportive parents. They are still together to this day. If I can have half the love in my life that the two of them have for each other, then I have succeeded. But I also grew up very poor. And so a lot of our entertainment was movies and going renting things from the video store that was walking distance. So I had like a milk crate on the back of my little Huffy bike with with some bungee cords, and that's how I would carry movies to and from the store to home. And my parents were of the mindset, life's tough, kid, get a helmet, in the sense of they never hid anything from me. Um, if I wanted to watch a horror movie, they would watch it with me, but the rule that we had was once I push play, there's no going back. They're not stopping it, they're not turning it off, and their thought process was whatever my imagination comes up with will be 100 times worse than whatever is in the movie. And that's true. I was very imaginative child. They were correct on that. So I was watching like AMC Fear Fest on Friday nights throughout October with my mom when I was like 5. My earliest memory, and I've said this many, many times on other podcasts, but my earliest memory I have is watching the Stephen King It miniseries with my mom as she's folding laundry, and I'm 4. And my dad even comes in the room and is like, "Do you think she might be a little too young for this?" And my mom is like, "Nah, she'll never remember this." And it is the earliest memory that I have. So I have always watched horror movies, but Halloween was a special time because my parents and a lot of their like longtime friends, I'm talking like the people that were in their wedding, longtime friends,
Mm.
lived within like a 3-block radius. And so there was this sort of like hidden agenda competition between everybody where everyone wanted to have like the cool house on Halloween. Sometimes that meant you had really, really cool decorations. There was a year that my dad built a coffin and paid the neighbor kid across the street to dress like Freddy Krueger. Why is he in a coffin? No one knows. And would jump out of the coffin to like scare trick-or-treaters. So sometimes it was decoration, and all of it always handmade. My dad made everything because we couldn't afford to buy it, so he would make it. Sometimes it was you had the best candy. There was a year that there was like an unusually hot October, and I grew up in Illinois, so it's not like California where it makes sense when it's hot in October. It should
Yeah.
not have been this hot that year. And my mom went, "You know what? I'm gonna go get a ton of like those like Otter Pop, like freezer pops." And so she bought like hundreds of freezer pops. And so kids would come by and they would get the choice. Do you want candy or do you want one of these little freezer popsicles because it's hot as hell out? And most of them would take that, or the parents would be like, "Can I get one of those?" Uh there was a couple years where the my dad would like grill and he was like, "You want a hot dog?" Like give hot dogs on Halloween. My parents like would go so hard, and the neighborhood I grew up in, there's a lot of other, like, poor families. Halloween is, like, the community holiday, and it's not a holiday where you have to deal with, like, your shitty racist in-laws or, having to dress nice or go to church, like, none of that happens. So, it was a time for our whole neighborhood to kind of get together. Like, there are, like, little lore drops in my life from Halloween as a kid that I'll never understand. Like, who was the random guy in our neighborhood who would dress like Michael Myers and just stand in the middle of the street and do nothing? I have no idea. I probably know who that guy is. I probably saw him all the time at block parties or at the gas station. But on Halloween, I don't know who's behind that mask. I still don't know. It's been 30 something years. But like that sort of stuff was what I grew up around. So I love Halloween. I've always loved Halloween. And the hardest part about moving out of the Midwest and moving now to California is like trick or treating out here is not the same as it was then. And it just bums me out that like I don't get trick or treaters. And I'm like, no, I want to give you candy.
Yeah, yeah. We have a very weirdly, like, we live in a neighborhood, like in a house in a residential neighborhood in South Austin. There are kids around, but it is always a total crapshoot how many of them will actually show up at our door for Halloween, but at least we always get some. Um, so it's interesting. Like your childhood Halloween sound amazing. I have very good memories of trick-or-treating and Halloween as a kid, but it was a little different because I grew up on a cattle ranch in Texas in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, wow.
So like there we had neighbors, but the neighbors were all like a quarter of a mile away. So the way that we trick or treated was you'd had to drive. You couldn't just walk down the street. So it was kind of
Hmm.
different. And my dad, being my dad, I get my anxiety from my dad. And he was, again, coming from a place of love, was very like, I don't want them taking candy from anybody that I don't know. Cause he had read all the razor blade stories and he believed them.
Yeah, yeah.
So we would pile in the car in our costumes, and we would go to my grandparents who lived right up the road, and they would give us candy and take pictures and, oh, how cute you are and all this. And then we would go into town, and we would specifically drive around to the houses where my dad knew people. And my dad was ran a business in town, so he knew a lot of people. So we always had a good candy haul, but it was this wonderful communal experience because everyone knew us. It wasn't just like, oh, look, oh, you're Batman. Okay, here, Batman. Here's a chocolate bar. It was, oh, it's the Jacksons. Hi. Oh, you look so cute. Oh, look what I have over here. Look at this fun little ghost that shakes when you clap your hands and all this stuff.
Oh, I
And
had so many of those. I can hear that sound in my head.
yeah, my wife still has one, and we hang it up in the house because she likes to turn it on when kids come in and watch them react to it. Our dog is terrified of it, so it's off most of the time.
No.
He does not understand what's going on the ceiling. But so it was a really like affirmative, wonderful, supportive Halloween thing. But the costume thing, got weird one year, and this is where I tell my favorite Halloween story from my childhood, where I think I was 4, and we were also a poor family. We did not have a lot of money, so but my mom was very good at sewing, so pretty much exclusively our costumes were hand sewn
Hmm.
or assembled from, stuff we had around the house already. And I think the one exception was the year I was Batman. They did buy me like the plastic Batman chest plate because my mom was
Hmm.
like, I don't know if I can sew that. But I was like 4. So it was one of the first years that I really remember Halloween. And it was like one of the first times that my parents actually asked me, what do you want to be for Halloween? And I didn't have an answer because I was 4. And I was like, I don't know. And my parents were like, well, do you want to? I don't know. They brainstormed. They threw out ideas at me, and I just kept going, no, no, no. And my dad, God bless him, came to me, and I don't know why he thought this was a good idea or what was going through his mind, but he went, Matthew, you know how you like that bit in A Charlie Brown Christmas? Not It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown listeners. A Charlie Brown Christmas, the one from a different holiday. Do you know how you like that part where Linus pretends to be a shepherd? Yeah. Do you want to be a shepherd for Halloween? So I will find this image and put it up on our socials for Halloween, but there are photographs of me, age 4, walking around on Halloween as a shepherd who attended the birth of Jesus Christ. Because
Did you get apples in your candy bag that year? Because I feel like that's how you get apples.
I would have just gotten apples and dental floss. Now but the best part of it, and I think the reason that he pitched it was either my mom had already made me a costume for the Christmas pageant at church the year before, or she was about to make one for that coming December. One way or the other, there was a shepherd costume in progress for an unrelated thing, and my dad was just like, two birds, one stone, let's go. But the best coda to that is I have to find this. When we would go to my grandparents' house, my granddaddy had a one of those big old shoulder mounted 80s ass camcorders, and he would record us in our costumes. And that year, my older cousin was Dracula. And he had the full, like his parents had the money. They went all out. They bought all the Dracula accessories and had the makeup done, and he had blood trickling down from the corners of his mouth and all this stuff, and his hair slicked back. So there's footage of my cousin dressed as Dracula walking around my grandparents' kitchen, kind of twirling his cape and making faces and being Dracula, and then just like 4-year-old me trying not to trip over my shepherd robes as I'm trundling through the house with my trick-or-treat bag. So that's the most memorable Jackson Halloween story that I have, I think.
I love that. I like my Halloween costumes. I know when I was like really little, I was a witch for like 4 years in a row because I was like, this is my favorite costume. I'm just gonna
Hmm.
just wore the same costume until it didn't fit anymore. And then one year, my sister was going to be an angel because she was in, I don't know, like tumbling class or something, and they got all white leotards so that they could, have that. And my sister's like, "Oh, I could use this as an angel costume. I just need the wings and the halo." And so then I got in my head like, well, if she's going to be an angel, then I need to be the devil. And I didn't stop there. To prove that I was devilish, I don't know how I got this idea, but I was like, I need 2 styrofoam mannequin heads and 2 long black-haired wigs. My parents were like, "Where are we going with this?" I was like, "And then I need 2 pictures of my face doing different faces to put over the mannequin head, so I'm the devil, and I have 2 decapitated heads, but they're my head." And my parents were like, "Sure, okay. I do have a photo of this, I will send it to you." Again, because it was, like, the late '90s, early 2000s, they straight up just, like, printed photos of my face on, like, printer paper, like glossy printer paper, and just kind of wrapped it around a mannequin head. There's no shape to it at all. And then the cheapest $5 wig that was definitely at like the bottom of a costume bin somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I look so happy and so proud. I'm like, yeah, I did this. I came up with this great idea. And I look at this picture in hindsight, I'm like, where did this idea come from? What was I doing? But kudos to my parents for being like, sure, we're not questioning this. The logic makes no sense. We don't care. It's fine.
That's amazing. I love that too. I love when a kid shows up to trick or treat and they clearly just told their parents, "I want to do this, this, and this," and their parents just went, "Okay, makes no
Yep.
sense to me, but it's your costume, kid. Go for it."
Yeah,
Um,
it's I'm very lucky to have the parents that I do. My parents also worked with like our local rec center, like a lot of volunteer work because again,
mhm.
we didn't have money, so my parents were like, if we want our kids to have like a good time doing like lunch with Santa or lunch with the Easter Bunny at the rec center or whatever, my parents got involved with the rec department to make sure that it was good because they wanted to make sure it was good for their kids. And so my parents worked with like our local like haunted house and haunted hayride, which was like shit. Like it's not good. But the hayride was my dad's like favorite thing in the world because it ends with Jason Voorhees, played by my dad behind a mask, with a fake chainsaw. Why a chainsaw and not a machete? Who knows? Um, but even knowing that that was my dad, I went on the hayride when I was like, I don't know, probably 6, and he jumps on the hayride as Jason Voorhees with the fake chainsaw, and like kayfabe stopped existing. I fully bought in. I thought I was gonna die. My dad had to stop the middle of this hayride around people and was like, "It's dad. It's dad. It's okay." And then take me, screaming child, off the hayride while everybody else who paid for that ride just was like, "Oh, that was so cute." And I'm like, "Good," because I would have been pissed if that would have happened to me as an adult.
Is this the root of your? You and I have something in common, which is we both are total junkies for horror everything, but we don't. Neither of us, I think, do like in-person haunted houses.
I do not do
I
in person.
Yeah, I can't do it. I can't. I'm sorry. I love horror. I'm sure they're great. Can't do it. But do you think that's the root of it? Was that experience with your dad?
So I think the real root of it is I went to a genuinely good haunted house when I was 13,
Mm,
because I also did pageants as a child, which, doesn't sound like it should align with somebody who's as into horror as I am, but hey, that's how it works. And all of the local like community pageants, like all the queens went to the county fairgrounds where they used to have the like county haunted house every year,
yeah.
and we got to go in for free with just our group. That was like a big selling point. And someone snuck up on me and I swung on them like out of instinct because I'm scrappy. And so that I think was the moment where I was like, oh, I can't do these anymore because I my fight or flight kicks in and I fight. And no one deserves to be punched in the face for being really good at their job. But yeah, there's something about it being in person and out of my control, the way that like a movie allows safe distance, that I just can't do it. I also am very uh suspicious when it comes to horror video games because again, like it's too directly interactive that it
Hmm.
spikes my adrenaline a little too high. And I already have a condition where I overproduce adrenaline, so sometimes I overproduce it so much I barf, which is not fun because it's not like, oh, I'm grossed out. It's like, no, my body just produced too many chemicals and my body's like, we got to get this out of here. But yeah, I swing on people. So yeah, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm a liability.
This is funny. Like you just like shook loose a memory that I have now. You were talking about haunted hay rides, and I remembered one time I went on a hayride. I think I was 12, and it was like a friend's Halloween party, and they all got us on a trailer for a hayride, and it was like the dads of some of my friends like all went out and they like went to a random spot on a country road and then all came out in costumes and scared us. And I remember one of the dads sort of climbing on the back of the trailer and reaching for me. And I very nearly broke his nose because I aimed my boot directly at his face. And because yeah, so that's again like that's not fun to me. Like the idea that
Yeah.
I'm going to start Because even now, I feel like if someone came out of the darkness at me, like my first instinct maybe wouldn't be to swing on them, but at least to like shove them into the wall. And I don't
Exactly.
want to hurt anybody.
Like, I get invited to, like, Halloween horror nights out here all the time. They're like, "We would
Yeah,
love for you to be there." And I was like, "No, you would not, because I would hurt someone." Like,
yeah.
it's not something really that I can control. I've got a little too much trauma in my life. If you sneak up on me, I'm gonna throw elbows. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
So this is just like guys, if you don't want your nose broken, like don't sneak up on BJ ever. It's
Don't
not it's
don't
not
do
cool.
it. I've taken self-defense classes. I know how to break a nose.
Yep. So let's speaking of Halloween and scary stories and all of that, the reason that BJ is here, well, number one, it's I like talking to BJ, and whenever I think about horror stories, like new stuff that comes out, she is one of the first people I think of is like, what did BJ think of this? I want to know. But also because when I started this podcast, I asked BJ to be on, and she picked something as her topic that I went, oh, that's the perfect Halloween special. So, BJ, if you wouldn't mind introducing your topic and why you wanted to talk about it specifically.
I am here to talk about Alvin Schwartz's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark book series because it is what fostered my love of horror literature as a youth. And it is also what made me interested in the power of horror storytelling because, as we discussed, I was allowed horror as a kid where a lot of my classmates were not. So during the scholastic book fairs, I was the one who would buy the books, I would have them, and I would do these little, like, illegal readings to my classmates, because they weren't allowed to have these books, and so I became sort of like the arbiter of all things scary stories because I could read these stories to my friends, and I got really into, reading them, coming up with voices, doing what have you, and, if it wasn't for these books and the ability to tell those stories, I don't think I would be where I am today.
Yeah. So, speaking of voices and readings, we have asked BJ to do a very quick reading of one of the scary stories to tell in the dark. Which story did you pick, BJ?
The Babysitter, and the reason I chose The Babysitter is because, as you will hear when you hear the story, um, it's essentially, When a Stranger Calls, but, like, the urban legend story version of it, dialed down for children, and it was my favorite one growing up because I knew about When a Stranger Calls because my mom talked about it. She was like, "It's one of the scariest things. It's based on a true story. It really happened. The call was coming from inside the house." Like it was like this big thing. And so then I get my scary stories to tell in the dark book, and I'm reading through it, and I get to that story, and it like broke something in my brain where I was like, "My mom was right. This did happen because it's in a book. Therefore, it must be real."
All right, listeners. So, we're going to take a short break while you listen to The Babysitter as read by BJ Colangelo.
This is The Babysitter. It was 9 o'clock in the evening. Everybody was sitting on the couch in front of the TV. There were Richard, Brian, Jenny, and Doreen, the babysitter. The telephone rang. "Maybe it's your mother," said Doreen. She picked up the phone. Before she could say a word, a man laughed hysterically and hung up. "Who was it?" asked Richard. "Some nut," said Doreen. "What did I miss?" At 9:30, the telephone rang again. Doreen answered it. It was the man who had called before. "I'll be there soon," he said, and he laughed and hung up. "Who was it?" the children asked. "Some crazy person," she said. About 10 o'clock, the telephone rang again. Jenny got to it first. "Hello," she said. It was the same man. "One more hour," he said, and he laughed and hung up. "He said "1 more hour. What did he mean?" asked Jenny. "Don't worry," said Doreen. "It's somebody fooling around." "I'm scared," said Jenny. About 10:30, the telephone rang once more. When Doreen picked up, the man said, "Pretty soon now," and he laughed. "Why are you doing this?" Doreen screamed, and he hung up. "Was it that guy again?" asked Brian. "Yes," said Doreen. "I'm going to call the operator and complain." The operator told her to call back if it happened again, and she would try to trace the call. At 11 o'clock, the telephone rang again. Doreen answered it. "Very soon now," the man said, and he laughed and hung up. Doreen called the operator. Almost at once, she called back. "That person is calling from a telephone upstairs," she said. "You'd better leave. I'll get the police." Just then, a door upstairs opened. A man they had never seen before started down the stairs toward them. As they ran from the house, he was smiling in a very strange way. A few minutes later, the police found him there and arrested him.
That fucking ruled.
It's
Um,
so little and it's so short and there's not a whole lot of tension, and it does end with them being like, "And then the cops arrested him," because you have to do that for children's stories. You have to like not let them think that this madman's still on the loose. But it doesn't matter. I love that story so much.
it's a great story, and it speaks to one of the best things about this series, which I went back and reread all three. Like I had read, stories here and there over the years. Obviously, wasn't allowed to read it as a kid, but I went back and reread everything. And a thing I think you sort of forget, or some people might forget from childhood to adulthood, is like Schwartz did, these are all like built on folklore research.
Yes.
Like he went and did his research, and he cites sources. So if you want to do deeper reading on all of these, there's a bibliography. And it gives the books, if you're just sitting down and reading them as stories, it does, so many of them have that air of like, oh, I feel like I remember hearing about this happening to my cousin's dad, or I guess my
Mhm.
uncle. My uncle would be my cousin's dad. But like you hear it like, oh yeah, I had a friend who had a roommate who said that they knew a guy that happened to. And The Babysitter is a great example. He also does a variation on The Hook, which
Mhm.
is one of the great urban legends. My favorite stories in these that always felt, and I think it's because rereading this, I had a memory of my PE teacher of all people. Like when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, told us a version of the classic ghost story format where someone takes something from a dead person and then the dead person comes back looking for it. And
Mhm.
there are like half a dozen of those scattered through this series, but it was the guy, the golden arm. The guy dies and he has a golden arm, and the guy steals the golden arm, and then he comes.
Mhm.
Which is why, like, I think my favorite story in the entire thing is Clinkety Clink, which is about an old woman who dies with her eyes wide open, so they put silver dollars on her eyes to keep them closed.
Mhm.
And the gravedigger takes the silver dollars before he buries her, and she comes back, and the silver dollars are like in a cup, and they dance around while she's walking up the stairs. That's just so evocative and wonderful. Is The Babysitter your favorite, or do you have other stories that stick out to you?
I mean, The Babysitter will always be my favorite just because I was so convinced that it was real and there was something like very powerful about that. I'm also the same person who definitely thought Blair Witch Project was real because I saw it when it came out and I was 9. And so I was obsessed with it and was like, why are we not finding these kids? What's wrong with us? It was a whole thing. I used to draw the stickman on my like second grade homework all the time. I got in trouble. It's fine. It's a whole thing. I was a
Yeah.
weird kid. Um, so that one is always really good. I like the Hearst song because it is
Mm-hmm.
folk music. That was very interesting to me because I wasn't super familiar with the idea of like folk music. And then eh, because I grew up as a teen girl, anything related to like Bloody Mary, Ghosts and Mirrors, um, that was a very common like sleepover activity. So that one is always gonna be something I hold near and dear because it's something that we actively did, as we would like lock each other in the dark in the bathroom, and the longer you would look in the mirror with the darkness, like the more your mind would start playing tricks on you. And you like, I was so convinced as a kid that my friend Nicole's house was haunted because we did also Candyman because we were, living outside Chicago. So Candyman was very much like, that's real, that happened. But we would go into the mirror and call for Bloody Mary or uh Candyman, and like I could have sworn I saw something, but I know logically it's like, no, I just stared at my own face in the dark for too long and my face is distorted. So whenever I read, that story, I think it's in volume 2 is when they finally
Hmm.
did that story. Um it like it just brings back all of those memories. My favorite stories are the ones that are tied to real life situations and experiences that I had.
Yeah. Um, it's funny you mentioned Blair Witch Project because I did not see it in theaters when it came out, but I was also convinced it was real because there was a book. We would go to the bookstore and there would be that dossier that they did,
Mhm.
which I should have bought a copy of because I bet it's a collector's item now. But that was always like it. No, look, they took photos of the evidence and everything. It's real. And this is why media literacy classes are important to today's youth.
Right.
Um, Anyway, so you staged readings of these, which like the Scholastic Book Fair, man, it was just the best. Book Fair day in school, they brought those big rolly cases in, and you could just grab whatever you wanted. I wanted the scary stories to tell in the dark, and there was a story collection called The Dark 30, which was like a southern folk horror kind of thing that I was always fascinated by. Never was allowed to buy them. Do you remember when these readings that you would do started? Like how ritualized was it in your school that you were going to do this?
It was usually like the final day of book fair, like when the book fair was closing, because that's when everybody knew, like, nope, I spent my couple of days trying to convince mom and dad to, let me buy this book. It's not happening. Because the way that our school worked is our school had a very, very active PTA. And so when it was Scholastic Book Fair, they like some schools will not show the scary stories that tell in the dark books, because a thing people don't realize about book fair is that the schools get to choose what books they bring. And some schools, depending on where you are, book fair day is not, oh, I wish I had money day. It's everybody gets a free book day, because Scholastic does have these amazing partnership programs. I have a lot of really positive feelings about the Scholastic Book Fair, as not just a child who got to, buy books from the book fair as a kid, but also then when I was a teacher. The school that I taught at was in Cleveland, and Cleveland has the highest level of childhood poverty in the country. So Book Fair Day was free book day for these kids, and so I got to see the inner workings of how like Scholastic Book Fair Day happened, which I thought was really cool. But the schools pick what books you get, and a lot of schools would not stock those. Our school would stock them, but your parents had to give a permission letter to your teacher, because the teachers would look, and like some kids it was like, yeah, they can buy whatever they want. So then the kids would be like, I bought a pencil and this poster of a dolphin and no books at all. And then some kids it was like, yeah, they can get books, but it has to be like a novel, or it can't have pictures or too many pictures, or it can't have stickers or any of like the other like gimmicky things that sometimes go along with it. And my parents were very much like, she can get whatever she wants. She knows because we've told her that it has to be a book. So if she tries to buy something else, let her buy it and she'll, hear about it when she gets home. But a lot of kids were not allowed to have them. And so I would always buy them like day one. so that I could read them myself, read them on the playground, figure out where the good stories were, which ones had like the craziest illustration, because the scary stories that tell in the dark books are great. Yes, the stories are wonderful, but Stephen Gammell's illustrations are nightmare fuel.
Yes.
And so I would go through and figure out like which ones had like the most evocative imagery, and like that would be the one. And I would tend to like read the story and then show the image, so that like that was the lasting impression. But yeah, usually last day of book fair, when like, okay, it's clear no one else is getting these. It was either at recess, or if we had library that day, during library when it was like free reading time, and we'd like huddle in the corner so that we wouldn't get caught. But mostly it was recess. And they were used to us grouping together because we also came of age when like Pokemon was huge. So a lot of times at recess, if kids weren't playing, they were huddled in a circle, either playing Pokemon cards or watching whoever like was allowed to bring a Game Boy to school. Like that was the cool kid, because Game Boys were not everywhere because we were all poor. So we were
Yeah.
like, so we would just all watch someone else play a Game Boy. So they never thought anything of it. And it really did feel like like illegal in a way. Like I knew I was doing something that I could get in trouble for, but I also didn't care. I was like, no, this is fun. And so then we would do that and, read the story. And like the stories take like 3 minutes to read. So
Yeah.
we'd read a couple of them and then we'd like run around so that, throw off suspicion. But you would straight up, we would find ways to turn it into a game. So it'd be like, we're playing tag, but whoever's it, you're a Wendigo. And then you'd hear the teachers like, why do you know what that is? We're like, no reason.
I don't remember anything like that happening on my playground, which is a shame, but I like all the kids in my school when I was little, they knew about Freddie and Jason.
Mm.
Like these were the kids whose parents were like, yeah, watch whatever you want. And so they would come to school and sort of regale us with stories of Freddie and
Oh,
Jay. But of course,
yeah.
they would get all the details wrong, and it would never there was never like any plot. It was just like, and then Jason took that spear and it went through both of them, and you're like, oh, cool, okay. And it wasn't until I was like 15, 16 that I was able to get into that stuff. But you mentioned library time, and this is like my little secret exposure to horror when I was a kid. The books, I don't remember a kid ever actually reading scary stories to tell in the dark in my class. Goosebumps was the big thing for us. But what I would do is when we had our library time, and again, I grew up in a very rural, poor part of Central Texas. We had a tiny school library, but we would go and have library time, and I would sort of pick the books I was going to actually check out very early, and then I would go over, and it was in like the arts and entertainment section, which was like one shelf. There was nothing there. They had these books by a publisher called Crestwood House, and I know that because I've since looked it up and they're collector's items now. But Crestwood House did this series of photo books that were monster movies. And by monster movies, I mean like Universal stuff from the 30s and 40s. So it was like there was a Dracula one, a Frankenstein one, the Mummy, the Wolfman, King Kong was in there. And they did one that was just like all mad scientist stories. And you would open it, and it was basically all of the production stills from those Universal movies, and then like a very basic kid friendly plot description of what happened.
These are the
And I
ones with
would,
the orange font
yes,
too.
orange font. Yes,
Yeah, we
there.
used the orange font for our Sleepaway Camp book to kind of evoke that feeling of those
That's why I
books.
know that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes. They had orange fonts, and they're beautiful. Like the cover designs are amazing. But I would sit in the library during library time and read the plot of Dracula the movie and Frankenstein the movie, and that was my little secret horror story thing. So by the time I watched those movies when I was like 15, I knew exactly what was going to happen, but I very specifically remember the scene in Frankenstein when the creature accidentally drowns the little girl.
Oh, poor Maria.
Yeah,
R.I.P.
yeah, poor Maria. But I remember the way that the writer phrased it, because he was like, he was in the monster's head, like the monster sees that all of these flowers are so pretty and they float on the water, but he's out of flowers. Maybe if he tosses pretty Maria in the water, she'll float too. And it was just the most like draw your own conclusions kind of thing, because he never said like
Mhm.
she died and they carried her corpse into the town or anything like that. But I was just like, oh my God. Oh my God, the monster. So that was my little secret library exposure to horror. But getting back to scary stories to tell in the dark, you you mentioned already, like you are a horror storyteller. You have directed films, you have written fiction, you are immersed in this stuff. And you're also one of the smartest analysts of why horror stories work and don't work that I know.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
So I'm wondering if you like go back to primary school BJ sitting there reading those books. What did you notice as you were reading them, other than like obviously there's a thrill of getting to do that as a kid, but are there like patterns you picked up on that you still carry with you now in your own like writing and analysis and things like that?
Oh, absolutely. So it's twofold. So the irony is that the first time I realized that horror storytelling can be used as a control method, and like that's a very bold way of saying it, but like follow me here, was actually watching Sleepaway Camp with a group of my friends. It was all of my parents' friends, like their kids. We all hung out together. We were all roughly the same age, give or take like 2 or 3 years, but we all watched horror movies together. And there was a night that we all watched Sleepaway Camp, and we were all afraid, but we were afraid of different things. Like the cook in Sleepaway Camp bothered me fundamentally because he's a predator,
Mm-hmm.
and I matured faster than all of my friends. So I was very much, unfortunately, already used to like unwanted attention from grown men, despite being like a 10-year-old. And so that like deeply fucked me up. And then one of the other kids in the group is deathly allergic to bees. And so the scene where Angela drops the beehive in the bathroom stall and the door is locked, like my friend was hyperventilating. And that was like, so that viewing experience was when I realized not everything that I'm afraid of is going to be scary to someone else. And the things that scare my friends sometimes aren't that scary to me. Okay. So like I dialed in on that very, very early. And then when it came to, horror storytelling, I realized that like pacing was very important. If I read a story too fast, it didn't have time to like sink in. Um, but the big one is that I think when you're little, you are told that like bigger is the thing. Like if something is really loud, that's scary, or if something is really strong, that's scary. But I found doing these like little readings, the ones that scared people the most is when it was a little quiet and when it was very controlled and when it was unexpected, because then it forces whoever is listening to lean in and to get closer. So then when something big does happen, it's right in their face. Versus if you keep them at a distance the entire time and then you're yelling and doing whatever, like that doesn't it doesn't really affect them as much. And so now when I write any bit of fiction or scripts or whatever, I remind myself that if I want this big moment or whatever to be really effective, I need to draw everyone in first. I can't just hit it out of nowhere. That sort of a shock is not going to be as effective as if I have them dialed in, lulled into a false sense of security and then pop out at them.
That's an amazing answer. I also wanted to ask you about these books. Were the first volume was published in I think 81, and then
Mhm.
they carried through like 84 and maybe 89, something like that. And you talk a lot about we touched on it already in when we were talking about Sleepaway Camp and Rocky Horror, is the question of context.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking specifically of the episode that you and Harmony did about Lisa Frankenstein, and how you perfectly sort of explained, because you and I both, when that movie came out, were like, why don't people love this? This is amazing. And
I'm
you,
wearing a Lisa Frankenstein shirt as we record.
yes, By the way, everybody watch Lisa Frankenstein this Halloween. It deserves it. But you were talking specifically about it is a movie that harkens back to that like 80s style of sort of genre comedy storytelling, and it's paced that way.
Mhm.
And people think that it's boring or weird because it's paced that way, and you were making the point of like, no, 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 it's trying to work in a very specific context and style, and you need to sort of be a little bit literate about that context in order to understand what it's doing. I find these stories in scary stories to tell in the dark, they very much function as like 80s kid horror stories.
Mhm.
And I think that's valuable because like there's one story in volume 3, and I'm gonna forget the title of it now, but it's like a page and a half, and it's like a man found an empty house, and it was cold one night, so he was like, I'll sleep here and no one will notice. So he goes into the house, builds a fire, and goes to sleep. And it's almost morning, and the fire's died down, and something crashes down the chimney, and he freaks out and he runs away. And it's this horrible skull face thing, and it comes up behind him and taps him on the shoulder and says, where are you going? End of story.
Mhm.
That's the entire thing. And I feel like now, if you were trying to reverse engineer that, you would be like, but where did the thing come from, and what does it want, and why is it? And I love the like you mentioned horror as a control method and the importance of control in these stories. And I feel like it's so valuable to read these stories in that way. Contextual. Does it make sense where I'm going? I feel like I'm rambling
Yeah,
a little bit, but I'm
no, it makes complete sense. I mean, because whenever we think about film as a control method or whatever, like if you are good enough at what you do horror-wise, you can control when the people in your audience are taking a breath. Like if you are good enough at what you're doing, you can have control over that. That's why jump scares are so effective. That's, and it's paced the same way that you do comedy. That's why like comedy and horror, like people who make comedy movies tend to be very good at making horror movies because a setup for a punchline is a very similar practice to a setup to a scare. But when we talk about it, we tend to talk about it in terms of like movies that make you cry. Like people will talk about Pixar all the time and be like, Pixar is emotionally manipulative. And it's like, is it emotionally manipulative or is it just effective? Like, are you confusing its effectiveness with manipulation? Because people don't like to admit that they are susceptible to manipulation. They don't like to admit that they can be influenced by the media that they are consuming. And so when you have a Pixar movie that makes you cry, instead of going like, wow, that was a really good story, it made me cry, they get mad and they go, that was emotionally manipulative, because they don't like admitting it got you. You got worked by this movie. You gave yourself over to a piece of fiction and it had an effect on you, and you don't want to admit that. And the same thing happens in horror, where a movie will scare somebody, a jump scare will get somebody, and there are plenty of people who have good fun and they're like, that was good, they got me. But the visceral anger that people have towards jump scares, I think it's because they're just embarrassed that they got worked. You're not better than this movie. You're not smarter than this movie. You're not above this movie. It got you, and you don't know what to do with that feeling.
this is true, and this is something I've harped on in past episodes. Is people who view horror films as things they have to beat, which is always so funny to me. Is the people that I meet I'm sure you meet these people too, who come up to you and go, "Oh, you like horror? Yeah, I don't watch horror because it's not scary. Doesn't
Yeah.
scare me."
I
Like,
can't deal with people. It's the same people that will say something like, "Yeah, well, you're not a real horror fan until like you've actually been to the hostel from Hostel and killed someone." And it's like, "What are you talking about? Like you're out of your fucking mind."
yeah. Oh my gosh. So one thing I wanted to make sure to talk about before we go. Uh, it's on my mind a lot lately because I have an 18-month-old son, and I don't want him to grow up in an environment where horror is not allowed. Like I want him to have a healthy appreciation, and like if he's not into it, that's fine. Move on to other things, but I more than anything want him to understand like it's okay to be scared, and sometimes it's fun to be scared, and these are the things that daddy likes because sometimes it's fun to be this way. You're a lifelong horror fan who literally as a child became a horror storyteller, and you also have experience in education.
Mhm.
So I just want your raw perspective on what is the value of scary stories for young children to you.
Oh my god, it's invaluable. So the first thing that I always tell people is, in order to introduce a child to something scary like this, you need to really know your child. You need to really have a good relationship with your kid and understand what they can handle and what they can't. My sister and I grew up in the exact same environment, the exact same parents, like very similar parenting styles. My sister, for a very long time, could not hang with this sorts of things. She did not like being scared. Lest we forget, she was the angel for Halloween while I was the devil carrying my own faces. So my parents knew there were certain things that they could get away with me that they could not get away with her. My parents are also big pranksters, and they knew they could prank me and I'd be a good sport about it. If they prank my sister, it's going to ruin her day and give her nightmares, and then that's their problem to deal with now. So know your kid, but there is a benefit to horror stories that are age appropriate. I'm not saying that every child needs to have my upbringing and watch Stephen King's It at 4. I actually would not recommend that for most kids. But if they can handle it, if they're interested, there's no harm in it. Because the benefit of horror stories is that it forces people to learn how to navigate negative emotions in a way that is not directly going to harm them. It is a great way to introduce concepts of mortality without it being somebody that they know personally, because I cannot express how valuable it was for me to have understood death and that concept from a young age because I watched horror when people in my real life or pets started dying. Because you never want your child's first experience with death to be like, your grandma died and she's never coming back. That is such an overwhelming sort of thing to wrap your head around, even as an adult, let alone a child who does not have the best emotional regulation skills. So not only does it help with those big themes, but it also helps you learn how to navigate those emotions. How do you respond when you are afraid? It is a very good thing to know that, because that helps you with like your defense mechanisms. It helps you assess safety in the world around you. And being afraid and exploring the feeling of being afraid allows you to flex that muscle. It allows you to strengthen that muscle. There are so many kids now who are now growing up into teenagers, who are now growing up into 20 somethings, that I genuinely worry about, because after the 90s, a lot of like kid friendly, or what we would refer to as like gateway horror, went away. Like I grew up and I could choose from Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark, So Weird, Erie, Indiana, like all of these different shows, and learn to deal with those emotions. And then somehow we got it in our heads that this is too scary, this is too much for some kids. And so instead of giving them anything, we took it all away, and now we have kids whose experience with horror as is being thrown into the deep end, is being like completely unprepared and traumatized and watching a Saw movie when they're like 8 and not understanding how to process it. And then they're either scarred for life or they're desensitized so early that they are constantly chasing something worse and more depraved. And so it's like you want to guide them through it so that they understand what's going on, why they feel that way. Why is this scary? What about it is making you feel scared? Do you see this in real life? Like what are the connections that you can draw here? And I genuinely think that a lot of parents want to protect their children. You
Yeah.
don't want them to feel distressed. You don't want them to be sad or scared or angry, because you know that those are not fun feelings to have, but they are universal emotions. Children at some point in their life will be upset, will be angry, will be scared. And instead of just trying to protect them from that, and then by the time they do feel those emotions and they have no idea what to do with it or how to process it, ease them into it in a way that allows them that safe distance. So then when it does happen in real life, they know what to do, and you're helping your child prepare for life.
I think we could have done a whole hour just on that. That was an amazing answer.
I
Um,
think about it a lot.
yeah.
When I was a teacher, I taught social emotional learning, and my specialty was in fear. And so I worked with my kids a lot on fear and how they navigate that emotion. So, yeah, one of these days I might just like write a book on gateway horror or something. We'll see.
Well, this was since you brought it up, I was thinking about it. It is true. Like there were so many sort of child aimed horror things. And I feel like we're when we were kids, and I feel like we're starting to get back into it a little bit now. Like, I mean, Goosebumps just announced its second season on Disney Plus, so they're doing that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But there are, I mean, you also do get into the trouble of like so many of these are like nostalgia machines, and they're not really for kids. They're for like 35-year-olds.
Right. They're like 35-year-olds who like want to get their kid to watch this, but when their kid's like, "That's lame, dad. I'm not watching it." We go, "Well, then screw you. I'm still watching it."
So what are some gateway horror things that have happened in the last like 5 years that you think are really great? The first thing that came to mind for me was Night Books, which I really enjoyed.
Oh yeah, night books is very fun. Tell me, why do you like night books? Because I'm very curious. Not a lot of people ever talk about night books.
I mean, it helps that churches covered Cry Little Sister from the Lost Boys for that movie. So that's a big reason. I like Night Books because it's similar to like the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark movie, which is great. It it focuses on like my thing when I talk to people about horror and like especially horror for younger people is like Roger Ebert called the movies machines that generate empathy, and I feel like horror movies dial that to 11. They are empathy machines, and it's why like the person that you know who's the horror fan with all the tattoos and the piercings is probably way more sensitive to your emotional state and helping you navigate it than like the person that you think of as quote unquote normal. Um, I like that it's about a weird little kid who writes scary stories and
Hmm.
that he learns in the end that that's his superpower because and it's so simple, right? It is in terms of like character arc, it is so simple that it's a kid who writes scary stories and his parents and everyone around him are like, "Oh, he's a big weirdo." And then he meets a witch who basically wants him to be Scheherazade and he realizes, "Oh, this is actually like this is actually important. Like I am learning and imparting things to other people about facing fear and the importance of sensitivity to navigating emotions like fear, and it actually saved my life." Like plus it's just fun and spooky, and I think
Hmm.
oh god, I'm blanking on her name now. The actress who was Jessica Jones.
Kristen Ritter.
What's Kristen Ritter? There you go. Kristen Ritter is really fun in it, and just getting to be like a glitter witch.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, I just have a lot of fun with that movie.
Yeah, I think that one's really, really fun. Babysitter's Guide to Monster Hunting is, I feel, very similar in that vein, of something that's newer. A lot of the stop motion stuff, Wendell and Wild, Paranorman, Monster House, I
Hmm.
think all three of those are absolutely great. One that I think kind of went a little underseen, which was a bummer, was We Have a Ghost,
We
which
Have a
is
Ghost is really fun.
it's very fun. So it's Christopher Landon who did the Happy Death Day movies and Freaky and some of the Paranormal Activity movies. So like he's a hardcore horror guy, but We Have a Ghost is definitely for like preteens, and I think that it's wonderful. I mean, Lisa Frankenstein, I also consider a great gateway horror movie. Um, the real issue that I run into is that a lot of the gateway horror movies they kind of go direct to streaming a lot of time, and they kind of get
Hmm.
buried because people are looking for the more like hardcore horror movies than they are
Yeah.
the gateway stuff, which is, a bummer. And I have a scorching, scorching hot take. I don't think the Witches remake is as bad as people make it out to be. Obviously, I prefer the original Witches with Angelica Houston. I think it's great, but I think the new one they did with Anne Hathaway is very, very effective because something else that a lot of people don't like to accept, but they're gonna have to, is that a lot of kids today, they can't get on board with practical effects because it looks too weird to them, but they will suspend their disbelief for anything digital because that's what they are used to seeing. So the digital effects in The Witches, like that scares the hell out of them because they're used to seeing that. Um, I don't know. It's very strange how little it has been, like how this just seems to be kind of an untapped market because so many of them seem like they're really catering towards YA. And there are some great YA series. I love One of Us is Lying, which I think is a
Hmm.
Peacock series. Definitely for I think like older junior high to younger teen, given some of like the stuff that they feature in it. And of course, anytime I'm recommending for children, if you don't want like sex, it is your job to look up if a show or a movie has sex in it.
Hmm.
You can't treat television like a babysitter. So don't get mad at a movie if it contains something that you're not super fond of. That's your own fault for not looking it up. But a lot of the stuff that is coming out is sort of neglecting that preteen audience. It's either like very, very baby friendly, like for little kids, or it's for teenagers. And this sort of like soft spot in between for like 9 to 12-year-olds is it's bleak and it bothers me. We need more of that because those are the ages when kids are really starting to figure out how to do things independently of their parents, and we're failing our kids by not giving them stuff to prepare with.
Absolutely. You and I should write something. I don't know what it'll be, but we'll do it. We'll fix it. Fine, I'll do it myself. I don't care. But no, seriously, it We Have a Ghost is wonderful. Like if you liked Happy Death Day, it kind of has that same vibe, but it's very warm and
Mhm.
it is a sort of kids getting into trouble behind their parents' back movie that's it a lot of fun and feels very modern in the way it approaches what might happen if you actually came across a ghost.
Mhm.
So our guest has been the great BJ Colangelo. Thank you for a wonderful first Halloween special here on The Scares That Shaped Us. Before we let you go, tell the people where they can find you online and what you have coming up.
Sure thing. You can find me on all forms of social media at my name at BJ Colangelo. Our podcast is anywhere you get your podcasts at This Ends at Prom. We also have a Patreon, patreon.com/This Ends at Prom, where we also talk about teen TV and teen boy movies through our Sadie Hawkins dance episodes. So for October, I can't remember what the second one is, but we are doing Christine for one of them, which I'm very excited to talk about because
Ooh,
one of my all-time favorites.
yeah.
And as far as anything that have come up, if you want my daily reading, I write at Slash Film. I am the lead evening news editor there and one of our like resident think piece writers. So I'm over there writing about all things entertainment. And you can find our book Sleepaway Camp at diediebooks.com.
Our guest has been BJ Colangelo. BJ, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was very nice to get to talk about all my childhood spookiness.
Yes, same. Thanks once again to BJ Colangelo for being a guest on the show. I've known BJ on the internet for something like 10 years or so, and it was actually the first time we'd ever spoken to each other. So it was great to chat with a friend of mine, as well as have a great discussion about scary stories to tell in the dark and Halloween and kids and horror. I will be posting photos of the Halloween costumes we discussed. BJ was nice enough to send one over, and I have my photo of me as the Christmas shepherd on Halloween. I love you, mom and dad. So keep an eye out on that on our socials for that. And speaking of our socials, we are at Scares Shaped Us on Twitter. We are at Scares Shaped Us on Facebook. You can go to thescaresthatshapedus.com. That's where you'll find past episodes of the show and updates on anything we have going on. If you want to contact us for any reason, we are scares that shaped us podcast at gmail.com. Feel free if you have a question or a suggestion or you just want to ramble about something that you heard on the show at me. That's fine. I read the emails. I'm happy to read whatever you guys have. I really appreciate everyone listening. And if you like the show, please do take a minute to rate and review us on the podcasting app of your choice if you have the time and you're able. It really helps us get noticed and continue to build this really fun show that we're doing. And as always, tell your friends. We're having a great time. We want to keep having a great time. And speaking of great times, next week we continue our unbroken streak of 3 episodes clustered right around Halloween. Josh Mallerman is going to be on the show, the author of the scariest fucking book of 2024, Incidents Around the House. And we have a wonderful discussion about that book, the impact it's had, the response it's had, and Twilight Zone, the movie, the anthology film from the 1980s that, according to Josh, really opened up his mind to everything that horror stories had to offer. That's going to be fun. That is going to be out Wednesday, November 6th at noon Central. That's 1 p.m. Eastern. We hope you'll join us for that. Have a happy Halloween, everybody. Until next time, I'm Matthew Jackson, and you're listening to The Scares That Shaped Us.